Hi, it's Pastor Andy with our Monday discipleship video today. And today we're going to reference within the Bible, but we're going to talk about something a little different because there is a phrase that is growing in popularity, and that phrase is Christian nationalism. Now, Christian nationalism is really just maybe one step removed from the idea of religious nationalism. And I know people will say, well, Christianity isn't a religion. Yes, okay, but it is within that same realm. And many people recognize dangers of religious nationalism, or what we might say is a nation state that is built upon top of religion. And of course, that's been true throughout history, but it's true in our world today, such as a country like Iran, for instance, that has Islam as its primary and almost entirety and centers the government around that. On the other hand, it doesn't have to be truly religious as we think of it. A country like China is largely atheist in its approach, but everything about China is geared from a governmental perspective, not from a personal perspective necessarily, is geared towards a control, and that includes a state-controlled idea of belief or religion, as we might say. Now, again, many people will point to the dangers of religion and government being completely intersected in that way. However, when someone's own personal belief or their sphere of belief is they're trying to get that across from a political perspective, a blind spot can be developed. For instance, Christian nationalists mostly want to return a country such as the United States to having Christian values and Christian laws. Well, I would say there's really nothing wrong with that. As a fellow Christian, I would say that premise behind that, there's really nothing wrong with that. Those values are welcomed on the one hand, but the means with which that is with which that is sought can be very counterproductive to the overall cause. Now, thankfully, the founders of our country, by the way, many were not Christians. They believed in a deity, but many were not believers in the one true God as he is. The founders, though, sought to separate the control of religion over government and vice versa. Now, they did not call for the full distinction of separation of church and state. They simply didn't. That came from a letter. It was misappropriated. The meaning was misappropriated from a letter that came many years later, a couple of decades later, because if any government employee, if any person for that matter who votes, but if any government employee has any belief system at all, whether it's Christianity or any other, if they have any belief system at all, and they hold those values, they hold those beliefs with conviction, then anything that they do will impact the government. So there was never to be a wall between church and state. The First Amendment was there in order to keep religion from dominating the state, a state-controlled religion such as they had come from in England. So someone might suppress their viewpoint, someone might suppress their beliefs for a while, but they can't ignore them if they are real. So we can thank the founders for the arrangement that they put in place. Otherwise, we would not be free to express our disagreement against the government for fear of expressing our disagreement against God. And we see this example countless times throughout history. If we did that, we would still be under the realm of the king, or I guess queen at this point. We would all be a part of the Church of England, the Anglican Church for that point. So, how do we respond? How do we respond when the intersection of our faith and the law of the government, or the culture for that matter, differs? Well, thankfully, Paul wrote about that in Romans 13, but we also have examples like that of Daniel and his friends. What we have is that Daniel and others adapted. For instance, Daniel is mostly known by his Hebrew name. Daniel. But in Babylon, he was called Belteshazzar. But the three friends that are mentioned here in the book of Daniel, their Hebrew names, their Jewish names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are not well known. Instead, their Babylonian names are much more well known: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We also find Daniel not fighting directly against the king's wishes, for instance, as it relates to eating certain foods, and because he wanted to stay true to the dietary restrictions of the Hebrew faith. So Daniel appeals, not rebels, but appeals to only eat certain foods for a period of time, and to have others judge him, his appearance, his strength, if the foods that he's eating is doing okay for his purposes, if he is remaining healthy enough, instead of eating the food that the court had prepared for him. And as the story says, he was actually healthier than the others who were eating that stuff. So God honored Daniel, and Daniel is therefore able to continue to eat what he wants. In other words, Daniel did not rebel against the culture. He was still able to maintain his own ways within the culture. Now, ultimately, Daniel and his companions would be placed in premium positions throughout the region. They were a part of the government that had killed many of their friends, their family, or perhaps others had been taken captive in so many ways, but their people had been ravaged by the Babylonians. But what better way to change the culture than from within? These four people adapted, maneuvered, not manipulated, but maneuvered in a way that they could infuse their thoughts, their beliefs, their worship of the one true God in with this pagan culture of Babylon. They remained faithful to God while still being trusted as government officials by the king. Now, certainly revolutions may be necessary. America fought a war, the colonists fought a war nearly 250 years ago to gain independence as a part of a revolution. But victory in that war brought the power of voting. We were not subject to a king. We had the opportunity to vote for a change of leadership instead of being under the whims of a king or of a dictator of some sort. We can be active in government now, and we can maintain the integrity of our faith as we do so. We can be active citizens within our towns or our states or our nations or even within the world, all while realizing that our primary citizenship is in heaven. Philippians 3:21. Because if our citizenship is in heaven, then we must set our minds on things above, as Paul wrote in Colossians 3. As believers, it is important for us to exercise our rights as a citizen of a country, if indeed we have those rights. Many people around the world do not. I am an American, and I should not take that lightly. But I am also a follower of Christ, a Christian, and I do not take that lightly. But the question we must ask ourselves is really, to which is our greater allegiance? To our country or to our Lord? The difference can be found in whether we refer to ourselves as a Christian American or as an American Christian. Each of those options only has one noun. We are either saying that we are an American with an adjective of Christian, or we are saying that we are a Christian with an adjective of American. That noun that should be the most important for the follower of Christ would be Christian. I am a Christian first, an American second. I can be proud to be both, but I must be a Christian first. So let us place our focus on Christ and then on our country. That is what Daniel and his companions did, not Christ because he had yet to come, but they placed their focus on God first and then on their country. The decision that was made by others then may not have been in their best interest. The decision that is made now by our leaders may not always be in our best interest as believers, as followers of Christ. But like Daniel, how we respond to those situations can allow us to have influence on those decisions if we will but first seek God and His righteousness. Remember the promise that then all these things will be added to you. That needs to be our focus. Seek God first. Seek His kingdom first. And let God care for us through that process.